James Ivory, good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yourself?
Okay.
My first question is fairly straightforward. Why did you want to become a director?
I didn't even know what a director was when I was growing up, but I always loved movies, and I knew I wanted to work in movies. And eventually I went to film school. And then while I was in film school, I began to see what the different options were in movie making, and it seemed that directing would be the right one for me, but I still didn't know what a director did all that much. I made some documentaries, and that was a one-man show, so then I understood that. But I didn't really know what a director has to do until we made our first feature in India, The Householder. Then it all came home to me rather quickly.
When did you first realize that you had a special affection for movies, or a feeling towards movies rather than theater or books?
I think very early on. I mean, when I went to the movies constantly, and our town had a lot of theaters, and I must have, from 8 or 9, I think.
That was in Berkeley, California?
No, that was in a little town in Oregon, Klamath Falls, Oregon. That's where I grew up.
Were you encouraged?
I was, yes, sure. Well, I remember being taken out of what was considered a violent movie once, and kind of straining around to see what it was that I was being taken out of, which was Gunga Din. But apart from that, no one ever, bothered to say I couldn't see this or mustn't go to that and so forth.
Because we're talking what sort of 40s, late 40s, early 50s?
It was late 30s, that would have been, or even mid 30s. I think the first movie I ever saw was about when I was 5 years old, so that would have been about 1934 or so. That's the first film I ever saw.
And no one thought it was strange or
No, I can remember my parents discussing it in the car and saying, "What do you think?" And, "Oh, I think he's old enough. All right, let's do it," that kind of thing. I remember that conversation to this day.
And a lot of people say film school is a complete waste of time. Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't think it's a complete waste of time, and it wasn't for me, but it wasn't, USC wasn't, their whole aim was really to prepare you for the making of industrial films and television and so forth, and not so much for making feature films. So in that way, I didn't really pick up stuff that I might have, if I'd gone, say, later on. And now the USC Film School is very high on feature film making.
Do you ever lecture at film schools, or?
Do I ever?
Mm.
Well, once in a while I'll go in connection with some film that's just coming out. Yeah, I do. They're usually there.
They're usually there?
Yeah, USC, that's usually where I go.
Because is there an abyss between the film school experience and the actual film industry experience?
Well, I think the problem is that a lot of people, they're not lucky about getting jobs, and just the most ordinary kind of job in films that are being made. They don't have the kind of luck that gets them on a set. If they do have that luck, I think they can, they make friends. Then they go on and do another one, and then gradually they work up. That is the way I've seen over all the years that I've made films. That's the way I've seen people get ahead. It's just by starting way, way down at the lowest level. And so maybe it's a driver.
Do you think that's still true today? That you're still working them out
do.
And working well?
Yeah, and that's what I tell people when they ask me, what should I do? How can I get in? And so forth. I tell them, just try to get a job on some film. Because you're not going to start out where they think they ought to be, as being an assistant director or writer or something like that.
Actually, the role of assistant director, unless you're assistant to the director, is a very deceiving job title, because you're not.
Very much so, very much, yeah. People always come up, may I be, I'd love to be your assistant. Well, if they knew what that really was. Sometimes you don't want an assistant at all. You don't want anybody bothering you. And other times you're so much, you owe your assistant so very, very much.
Are you optimistic about the film business at the moment and the work coming out of the students that you may or may not be put in front of?
Students' work, it seems to be the same. It hasn't changed in all these years, and even from the time that I was a student. You have maybe 3 or 4 people who are good, and the others aren't really very good, and the things they make aren't very good, and eventually they drift away and take up some other kind of work. But yeah, once in a while I'll see something really nice, and not only in the United States, but very often in Europe or China or somewhere like that.
You think there's one single quality somebody who has ambitions to become a film director should have?
Yes. To get your own way at all times.
Get your own.
Yeah, that's what I tell them. That you have to get your own way, otherwise you don't get very far.
Have you always had Final Cut yourself? Or?
I have, except in one. There was one film I didn't have. I didn't even know what Final Cut was. I just assumed I always had it. But I learned when I didn't have it, what, it wasn't so good.
Are you a combative director then?
Well, and certainly at that time, yeah, sure.
So what was Venice Themes and Variations?
What was it? It was a documentary that I went to Venice on a summer vacation, and I just was bowled over by the place, and returned to Southern California into film school. And we all had to have these graduate projects. And I decided, well, I would try to get the money from my father and go back to Venice and make a film about Venice. And I thought about it and came up with a subject, and my father did give me some money, and I went back, and that turned after several years, and meanwhile I went to the Army and came out again and all of that. Finally it turned into a very nice film, and it was really how the painters down through the centuries have treated Venice, and how they've shown Venice in various ways in different times. And that's what the film was about, and it was successful. I mean, I sold it, and it got prizes and things of that kind. It's still around.
Was that what launched you as a, if you can say launched you, but was that particularly, it was important?
Well, it was a good, a good friend. It was.
Did the Venetians agree that, do you agree with the Venetians that Turner was the man who captured Venice the best? No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, it was a kind of best, but it was not something you find that often. If you're thinking of capturing it, I mean, I think his views of Venice were so much more than just they were such a large kind of imaginative view of it and vision of it. They weren't really sort of down to earth like Canaletto or somebody like that. Do you know how many films you've made set in the United States?
Well, about a third of my features were set in the United States. About a third of them were made in India, and a final third made in France or England, like that. They're just almost equally divided. And pretty much it was a period of my life that one period I was working in India, and I made a lot of films there, and then another period I was working in the United States, sometimes going away and coming back, and I made a lot of American films at that point. And then, starting with The Room with a View, I made a series of English films altogether. Well, 5 of them, if you include The Golden Bowl.
When did you meet Ishmael?
I met him in New York in 1961, and he was on the way to the Cannes Film Festival with a film that he had made and had been nominated for an Oscar as a short fiction film. And he was on the way to Cannes with that, and he came to see a film of mine because we had some mutual friends, and they said, "Oh, you'll like that film, go and see it," and he did. And then we got to talking, and then I was involved at the same time in doing a documentary in India, and I went back to India. He went off to India then after Cannes, and I went back to India to do more work on that documentary. And then he was going to make a feature film, which then didn't pan out. And we made The Householder.
Did you realize early on this was a man you could do business with, so to speak?
Oh yeah, well, I didn't know what the business was. No, I mean, I had no idea what having a film company, having a partner in a film company. I never thought about it in that way, but I did it. It all worked out.
Which point do you think that
there was a partnership for many years, I mean, until his death, I mean, actually until now. You're basically inseparable as partners, as a brand name.
Well, when he died is when I realized, actually, the enormous, as my closest collaborator, artistic collaborator, and when he died I realized what he had done. And strangely, it wasn't really till then, because that it was up to me to do everything. And I had never had to deal with so many different kinds of things, and I was very poorly equipped for dealing with some of them. And it was then that I really, really understood what I had lost. So, I mean, he was there through most of The White Countess, and he actually saw it before he died. Not completely finished, but he did see it. And then, we had planned my present film, which is The City of Your Final Destination, that we made in Argentina. We'd already gone down there and looked for locations and things of that kind, and met a lot of people. And he started me out on that. And then he died, and while we were at the end of The White Countess, so I had to go on and make The City of Your Final Destination more or less on my own, and which has been an unnerving experience, I have to say, because it's just, you know, one person can't do it all. I mean, I have producers, but I had, it was just different with Ismail, you know. He was always there to discuss things with and decide what was the right way to do something or the wrong way. I don't mean especially in the actual making of the film, but just the kind of shape of our existence and our lives making films, what we would do next, and what we would do with something we had just made, and so on, and festivals and all those kinds of things.
Was it a fairly well-defined what you did and what he did, or?
Pretty much, yeah. I didn't like to, and the same goes for Ruth. That's why we had this long partnership and collaboration, the three of us, because I would never get into his hair, and he would never really. Once in a while, he would object to something that I wanted, but on the whole, he didn't. And I would neither of us would ever dream of you know, disturbing Ruth when she was writing a script, and we would wait until she'd written it, and then we would, if we wanted something different, well, then we would say something, but we never ever looked over her shoulder or anything like that.
Did you both, you knew Ishmael before you met Ruth, or how did it?
Well, I'd actually met Ruth earlier, before Ismail, but I hadn't really come to know her. It was only later that once we decided to make The Householder, that's when I really came to know her. And then she said she'd do the script.
And it just worked out. I mean,
yeah, it did.
It just,
yeah. So, like things do sometimes. They do. Things do work out.
Do you work with other writers? She's written everything since then. To be honest, I didn't look up to see.
No, she hasn't. She hasn't written everything. There were some films that she didn't write, but most of mine she has. Yeah.
What would you think was her? If you had to say what was her special, if she has a special talent.
Well, being a fiction writer, being a very, very, very good fiction writer, well known and esteemed and all of that, and with tremendous talent at writing fiction, she had an extra talent for writing screenplays. And of course, most screenwriters don't have, they're not independently authors at the same time that they're writing screenplays. I mean, they're either screenwriters or they're authors, but they tend not to be the same, and do both. And also, as a writer, she wasn't in awe of some of these terrific, sort of classical books that we ultimately made. She wasn't the kind of frightened to change things or to strengthen something that she felt was weak or to get rid of something that she thought was superfluous. Being a fiction writer herself and someone who had already turned out, like, I don't know, 10 or 12 novels, she wasn't in awe, for instance, of E.M. Forster or even Henry James, let's say. She admired them, she loved them, but she could see that for a film, maybe something that they had done, something in the novel was not either underdeveloped and needed to be developed, or was superfluous altogether, and that a story needed something or was lacking something here or there that the film had to supply, because it just wouldn't have been, an audience wouldn't have responded to it so well. And that happened with, that happens with even Henry James. I mean, with the Bostonians. In the novel of the Bostonians, it ends in a very kind of, not exactly a downbeat way, but rather a sad way, and the film doesn't. The film ends with a kind of great moment of a sort of spiritual and personal triumph for Vanessa Redgrave character, the Olive Chancellor part, and in the novel she just is sitting crushed and weeping at the kind of the edge of the stage or something, and in our film she gets out and makes a tremendous speech for the liberation of women, and those kinds of things, and that helped the film a lot.
Was that playing to Vanessa Redgrave?
No, not at all. Mm-mm.
No?
No.
Were devotees of Henry James infuriated by this?
Huh?
Where Henry James is...
Well, you know, Henry James always wanted to be a playwright, and he was always hoping to find a theatrical audience and so forth. And I think, as just as someone who went to the theater a lot and aspired to be a writer of plays, that he would have thought what we did was a good thing, because it gave the audience something at the end. And so the last image wouldn't just be this poor girl who'd been sort of kidnapped by this male chauvinist from down south, crying as she's being led away by him to enslavement, let's say.
Do you find that the Indian third and the American third of your filmography is unfairly eclipsed by the English third?
Well, eclipsed in, let's say, box office results, with the exception of Heat and Dust. Yes, that's true. But I don't think it's, I don't feel that they, well, you know, I had very, very, very good material to work with when we were making our English films. I mean, 3 Forster novels, all of which were, you know, terrific, and one of them, you know, really, Howard's End is such a great book. And then The Remains of the Day, and those books, I mean, those films just, they just, and maybe that corresponded with a kind of high point that we ourselves had reached at that time, and that may have had something to do with the success of the box office. But I don't feel that the other periods that for instance, my French period, which is we've only just kind of come out of now, or the Indian films, for instance, I don't feel that they were, I mean, I very, very much enjoyed making those films, especially the Indian films.
Well, India's an amazing country. It's just a bit, I mean...
Well, and I felt I was kind of, considering the way we had to work, we had no money, and it was hard to get everything you needed to make a film in India. I couldn't get raw stock, and equipment was hard to, we had to buy and bring in our own equipment a lot, and with all those kinds of difficulties, I felt it was kind of our heroic period, really. The 4 films we made in a row there. It was The Householder, Shakespeare Wallah, The Guru, and Bombay Talkie. And years later, then we made Heat and Dust. And some shorts for television as well. Well, they weren't shorts, but they weren't feature films.
You've never been back, in the sense that you never, I don't think you've since...
Well, I haven't worked there since, no, I haven't worked there myself since Heat and Dust. And that was in early 80s.
So who picked up the E.M. Forster novel, which was presumably Room with a View, for the first time and said, this would be good?
Well, I did. I mean, I read A Room with a View and thought, this would be wonderful to make into a film, but there was a selfish motive behind it, because I hadn't been, when I first arrived in Europe when I was 22 years old, Italy made a tremendous impression on me. Otherwise I wouldn't have gone back to make a film about Venice. And so I went to Italy many times, and before I started going to India. And then for almost 20 years, I never went to Italy at all. I was always making films in India or in the United States. And I just thought, on reading Room with a View, gosh, it would be a lot of fun just to go back to Italy and make this film. I just wanted to come back to Italy. I missed it. And so we did. And when we went to Forster's estate at King's College in Cambridge, and said they thought we would want to do, you know, well, one of the grander kinds of novels, like Passage to India mainly. And then I said, well, I'd like to do A Room with a View, and they were surprised and thought that was rather a negligible little book, and why would anybody want to do A Room with a View when you could do A Passage to India or Howard's Inn? And I said, no, that's what I wanted to do. And so I said, all right, and made it. And it was terrific being in Florence and back in Italy, and we loved it. I loved it. Then I started coming to Italy again a lot.
It was 1985, wasn't it?
Right.
Review.
When we shot it.
Yeah, because I saw it in Oslo, Norway.
Hmm?
I saw it in Oslo, Norway, with a Norwegian audience.
Yes.
Which actually, for me,
In what language was it?
No, the Norwegians are sensible. Its original language with subtitles.
Yeah, good.
And the point of this monologue of mine is that it was being heralded as this quintessentially British film. Two questions come out of this. One is actually based on the reaction of the Norwegian audience, who thought the whole thing was hilarious. But as sitting there as an Englishman, I began to get this feeling they were laughing at the characters in a kind way, whereas the British audience certainly wouldn't have been laughing at the characters.
No.
But they'd have been identifying
Or doing everything not to identify with some, yeah.
The irony of the trio making this quintessentially British film.
I know, it's...
And were you laughing at the characters? Or was Forster laughing at the characters?
No, but Forster does make you laugh. And, but he makes you feel a lot of other things too. I mean, he writes wonderfully funny scenes sometimes. And you're not supposed to laugh at the characters as such, but laugh at the situation or the sort of setup that he's created, and which they're funny. But I tell you, after we shot we shot in Florence for 4 weeks, and then we went to England to shoot for another 6. And I remember on the very first day that I was on the set in England, which was in some village somewhere in Kent, with wonderful little houses and every kind of English sort of, picturesque thing. And I thought, why am I here? What the hell am I doing here in this street, in this little town? Why isn't some Englishman doing this? What do I know about England? I don't know anything. And I kind of had that feeling that it would be easy to make a lot of mistakes, because I really didn't know England at that point. And my whole familiarity with England really began in India, where I first met English people, and we moved on, and then eventually we made Heat and Dust, but I really didn't feel that I knew England well enough to tackle an E.M. Forster book.
Didn't stop you though, did it?
So no, well, as I said, it's like, did I know India well enough to tackle Ruth Jalbala's novel, The Householder? I didn't, certainly didn't, but you do that,
Have people who've met you been surprised that you aren't English?
Well, no Englishman would be surprised. No Englishman would ever for 1 second think I was English. But here, or in France, where people's ears are not attuned to accents, they don't know whether, I mean, if you said to a Frenchman, oh, he's English, and they'd accept that.
No, in the sense, I mean, Danny Boyle said once that everyone, after Trainspotting, everyone assumed he was Scottish. the director had to be Scottish. You, the director of The Room with You, have to be English.
Yeah.
And you just get some surprise reactions when they find out that you're not.
Well,
For the very reasons you stated.
Huh?
For the very reasons that you... Well, how could you possibly know how to make a...
Well, in a lot of cases I didn't, but I had awfully good help. We had, tremendous English crews, and Ruth, of course, grew up in England. I mean, she came there when she was 12 years old, and she lived there until she was in her 20s and went to India. And she has a very sharp eye and ear for the English.
Is there something to be said for the outsider looking in and seeing... Because actually, if you are from... if an English person were to have made A Room with You, an English director, it would have been too respectful. You can sometimes lose yourself.
Or too disrespectful.
Too disrespectful.
Considering who was making it, I mean, yes, it could be too respectful, but it might have also been someone English who wanted to send it all up and portray it as a bad period in English life. All that snobbery and all that kind of thing.
Which still exists today.
Of course.
They haven't changed that much. If you're going to hold that there, you know what's going to do to my
That's not good. Okay, I'll put it down.
Actually, what did you think of David Lean's Passage to India then?
I didn't very much like it. It seemed to me that David Lean himself was one of those powerful imperialistic sobs with a red face that Forster didn't like and wrote about in a critical way. And it seemed to me that there was something of that attitude in David Lean himself. And I had a lot of friends who worked on that film, both Indian and English. And I just didn't feel it was... I mean, I don't feel he was as interested in Indians as... Well, I shouldn't really say that because he had an Indian wife. But I just didn't feel that his sympathy was equal for both the English and the Indians. I think it had to be. I think that was just my feeling.
Would you ever have cast Alec Guinness in that role?
No, I wouldn't. But it was a very difficult role to cast, and I don't know. Everyone was saying they couldn't think of any Indian actor who could even do a role like that, and apparently there wasn't anyone that.
Why have you made so few films set in relatively modern times?
I made more than you think. The one I've just made was set in modern times. The one in Argentina. The one we're shooting, or we finished shooting, but we're editing now.
Well, there again, does it bother you that you're so closely associated with costume dramas and period pieces in any way?
It's good not to be making a costume drama or piece set in the past. It's much easier, and you're much more relaxed, I think.
Why so?
Well, you don't have to worry about all. There's 1,000 details that have to be thought about all the time when you're making a period film. It's good not to have to think like that.
Someone has to think like that, sure. I remember...
But you do as the director. Every single thing that's on the screen you have to think about and accept or reject. So it's nice when you're making a contemporary film and you don't, every single car doesn't have to be examined for whether it's got the right kind of license plate or what year it is, and it wasn't really, we're making a film in the 30s, but this car really was from the 40s and therefore we can't use it, or people's hair. Hair is a big thing you have to worry about a lot. All that, it's nice not to have to worry about it, just to be in present day life, everyday life. It's very relaxing, relatively speaking.
Were you surprised at the success of Room with a View?
And actually, when I first saw the rough cut of it, I thought, there's just a chance this could be successful. And then I saw the final cut, and I thought, there's just a chance this could be successful. And then I saw the rough cut of it, I thought, there's just a chance this could be successful. And then I saw the final cut of it, I thought, there's just a chance this could be successful. And then I saw the rough cut of it, I thought, there's just a chance this could be successful. And then I saw the final cut of it, I thought, there's just a chance this could be successful. And then I saw the rough cut of it, I thought, there's just a chance this could be successful. And then I saw the final cut of it, I thought, there's just a chance this could be successful. And then I saw the rough cut of it, I thought, there's just a chance this could be successful. And then I saw the final cut of it, I thought, there's just a chance this could be successful. And then I saw the rough cut of it, I thought, there's just a chance this could be successful. And then I sa And but I didn't imagine it would, run in the same theater in New York for over a year, things like that. So,
If it hadn't been as successful as it was, would you have done Howard's End?
we might have.
Might have.
Yeah, because the films in between that, in between A Room with a View and Howard's End, had not been that successful. I mean, it was Morris. People liked Morris. It was popular, but it wasn't all that successful at the box office. Then we made Slaves of New York, which was a real flop, and then we made Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, which was very, very well received, but was, I think, depressed a lot of people, and they didn't really get it. And then we made Howard's End. So it wasn't like we went from one big success and was back to back with another one. That came later with Howard's End and then Remains of the Day, which were back to back.
Because the knives came out on Slaves in New York, didn't they? The knives came out. You got a critical
Yeah,
mauling.
and which is a pity because it's got a lot going for it, I think.
But I'm about to say I can clearly remember, which is a very dangerous thing to say. But there was this thing that, why is he doing Tomjanovich's, Slaves in New York? They should be doing their Indian, their British.
Yeah. Well,
because you've been classified. That was.
Yeah, that's right. Of course. And that I was going to do that sort of New York scene was. Well, there were people who were as offended by that as if, say, I had wanted to do some great classic book of which I would know nothing, and they would say, well, why is he doing? Well, even Howard's End. What does he know about Howard's End? I mean, what does he know about the English? It could be like that. In this case, it was what did I know about downtown New York? Well, I didn't know really all that much. I mean, really know, like Tama did, but I didn't know anything about India. I didn't, so many other things I've done.
Which begs the question: is it really that important to know that much about the Liu?
Well, you've got if you're reasonably sensitive to what you see and hear, I think you do learn an awful lot about anything. And making a film is a very good learning process. Anyway, I mean, about the subject matter. I mean, you learn a hell of a lot when you make a film about the material and which you might not know otherwise. So I think anybody, if you're reasonably intelligent, can pick it up.
You had a great cast on A Room with a View. You have great cast anyway. Obviously, Howard's End, you had the Hopkins-Emma Thompson collaboration for the first of two outings. How did you get along with Anthony Hopkins to start with?
Very well, and he was very easy to work with, and he didn't have any, there were no kinds of twitches or hang-ups that made trouble. They all liked each other and got on. He's a lot of fun on the set. Says very funny things. Does very good imitations, including he's certainly done plenty of Ismail and myself. And Emma was great. I mean, she's so sane, for one thing. And secondly, she's a lot of fun. A very, very witty actress.
I don't think she'd done that many films before.
She hadn't? No.
Tall Guy and maybe something else. But there was very little in her previous work to suggest that.
That's right. Well, it was. I was sort of wondering. I mean, there were a number of people that read for me and different actresses, and they were good. But I just wasn't quite. I didn't feel I'd really found her, or Margaret Schlegel. And then Simon Callow told me about her, and so I asked her to come and read for me. And she did, and she didn't read from the script. She read from the novel itself. She just took it up and read 3 or 4 pages, and I thought, then and there, this is it, and she's the perfect one.
And Remains of the Day, you wanted to work with him again, or there was some.
Well, he was kind of attached to the project when by the time I became attached to it. It was going to be made by Mike Nichols, and Mike Nichols then decided not to make it. But in the period when he was sort of pondering whether he'd do it or not, Anthony Hopkins, who had read the book, went to his agent and said, "I'd like if Nichols is going to make this, I'd like to play that part of Stevens the butler." So by the time I got involved, he hadn't been cast, but he was there, and Sony, they were thinking about him, and they said, would I like that? How would I feel about having him again? And I said, fantastic, it couldn't be better. And then when I wanted to have Emma, I wanted her right away, and I went to him and I said, would you be okay with pairing up with Emma again? He said, fine, fantastic. So,
You look at the cast across the various films. So you've got Vanessa Redgrave, Maggie Smith. They're old school theatrical.
some of them are not. I mean, Maggie Smith is not. Maggie Smith was a stand-up comic. So was Emma. So was Hugh Grant. They didn't go to acting school.
Actually, I never knew Maggie Smith was a stand-up comic.
She first was seen actually on Broadway in New Faces of 1952 or something like that. That's where she first had a success, was on Broadway. But she wasn't a graduate of RADA or anything like that.
Where did you find Helen Bonham Carter?
She'd already made that film about the queen who reigned for 8 days and then was beheaded. What was she called? No, not Mary Queen of Scots, but anyway.
Oh, Lady Jane.
Lady Jane Grey.
Lady Grey, yeah.
And she'd made that film already, and so she came to see us, and she was sent by our English casting agent, Celestia Fox, and Helena came, and she had a lot of hair like this all over, and she has these very black, heavy eyebrows, or she did then, and they were sort of in a frown, and she sat like this on the sofa, staring straight ahead, with great big black boots on, and I thought, how in the world can she become that character? But I liked her. She was very beautiful and obviously very, very, very smart. And she had a real quality. She was only 19. I thought she's perfect. And she was, she grew gradually into the role.
Remains the Day, the book, is entirely in his head, isn't it? It is, isn't it? It's the first. I haven't read it, but I felt betrayed by the book, because the book actually had his thoughts, which of course you don't get in the film. And there's one scene in the book which I think was left out of the film, where he actually talks to a guy at the end.
Right.
And
we shot that.
In fact, I bet you left it out. And
we left it out.
We all thought it was great that you did.
Huh?
The consensus where I was among my friends was that it's great that you did.
It had been in the very first script that was written for the project before I got involved. And then the next script was written by Ruth, and she didn't like that scene. And but the first script had been sent to Anthony Hopkins, and he said, okay, he wanted to do this movie on the basis of the first script. Then a second script comes without that scene. And all actors love, male actors, love to cry. It's one of the things they really like to do. And as you remember, he broke down in that scene and wept a bit. And he said, if I don't get to do that scene, I may not do this film. So we said, well, all right, we'll put it back and we'll do it. And but then if we all decide we don't like it, then we'll get rid of it. How about that? He said, okay. So we actually shot the scene, but it wasn't good. It was limp, and also nature was against us, a tremendous storm. It was shot on a pier and in the seaside town, and there was this tremendous storm that blew up and blew pieces of lighting equipment into the water and all kinds of terrible things, and ruined the sound and everything else, and rained, so anyway, we got through it. We shot it, and we edited it, and then it was obviously not something that ought to be there. And he never said a word about it after that. He saw the film and he never said, "Where's that scene?"
He knew you had made the right decision, because it's unimaginable. I find unimaginable to think of that scene being in it, because he is that from the beginning to the end. Because you see
exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I think that's what Ruth felt about it also. I'm always not so analytical about things like that, and when he said, "Oh, I may not do the film unless that scene is there," and I said, "Oh, he's not going to do the film, and let's put it back," and well, so we did, but then,
It's easily my personal favourite of yours. It's one of my favourites of all time. I've never heard anyone speak badly of it. It's an absolutely wonderful piece of work. But before you made the film, okay, the book was out there and was much feted, but nobody said, "Why on earth do you want to make a film about a guy who expresses nothing?" And in that time period, I mean, was it a hard sell, or did you at that point not even need to sell it?
well, nobody had to sell me on the book. When we were making Mr. and Mrs. Bridge in Kansas City, one of the actors was reading it, and he came up and he gave it to me and he said, "This is sort of hard going, but you may like it." So I started reading it when we were in Kansas City, and I just couldn't put it down. I thought it was tremendous, and I wanted to make it into film immediately. And so then we got hold of, Ishiguro's agent and all of that, and found that Sony had bought the rights to it, and that Mike Nichols was going to make it.
Why did he drop out and you step in if you didn't?
It's a funny story, and I really don't know. I mean, I was told, for instance, that he was on his way to England, and thinking as he sat there on the plane, in order to make this film, we'd have to spend $25 million. Is that what I really want to do? And then he went back apparently to Sony and said, I've had second thoughts about all this, and I think that this isn't really for me. But he's a great Anglophile, so I don't know what went wrong.
What's the greatest pleasure for you as a director when you're working with actors?
Working with actors?
Because you've worked with the best.
Well, the greatest pleasure is not really trying to tell them to do a million things in a certain kind of way. The greatest pleasure is seeing how they have developed the part on their own, and then what they come up with. And sometimes it's just marvelous. I mean, it's so imaginative and so, I don't know, it's just such a pleasure. And that's a wonderful thing to have that happen. It doesn't happen all the time, and a lot of times you've got to work very hard to get something that you really are ready to go with from an actor.
Have you ever been intimidated by a very famous actor, star?
Intimidated?
Yeah. Choose that word specifically.
I would say yes, on one occasion, but it wasn't a kind of intimidation. We made a film once with Raquel Welch, who was notoriously difficult to deal with. And because she was, I don't know, she was very insecure, and she didn't like anybody, and she fought with everybody, and that was intimidating.
And how'd you resolve that?
Well, she left the film, and then after we'd already shot several weeks, she left the film, and she wanted us to fire the cameraman, Walter Lassley. And then she said that she wanted the producers to fire me and Ismail. It was our film. And they said they wouldn't. And she went away, and then they must have sent her some lawyer's letter that said, if you don't come back immediately, you'll be in default and owe us $1 million and so forth and so on. And so she came back.
How do you decide where to put the camera?
Well, I've always felt it was obvious. And when I read reviews of other people's films, that's one of the favorite thing of reviewers is that the director didn't know where to put the camera. I've read that a million times. They don't know where the director could. They weren't on the set. They don't know what would be the best angle. And I've always thought it was sort of, well, to me, sort of well, it was more or less obvious where you would put it. But it depends on the shot. I mean, but if you're talking about big master shot that's you want to show a lot and show everything at its best. And there's one or two vantage points which are the best for that kind of shot.
Is the most important thing for you the story in front of the camera or the camera telling the story? In other words, you're not photographing, you're just plonking it there and that happens and that's okay.
Well, it's a mix of the two. Sometimes the camera is all important and the way it moves and what it's showing, and particularly when you have someone in close up moving around and doing something or other. That's the camera telling the story, really. But there are other things in which you put the camera there because the camera can show you a big world, let's say, in which the story is going to take place, or that part of it.
I mean, you're a technically oriented director. I want a 28 or a 35 or whatever on the as far as lenses are concerned.
Well, I usually leave that to the cameraman, and then if I feel, because you're constantly watching on the video monitor and or looking through the camera, and then if I feel that we should go closer or wider, then I ask for it. But I think I've always left it to the cameraman to find the first composition, his first composition. And I think it's, I shouldn't be hampering the cameraman at that moment. He should find what he thinks is right.
Are you addicted? I mean, what kind of director are you on the set? And so are you, right, I want this here, I want this there, or is it not?
No, I'm quite relaxed and soft-spoken and laid back, actually. So.
Have you always been like that? Or
yeah, pretty much. Well, maybe not in my very first films. I particularly, when we first started in India, because I really didn't know a thing, and so I'm sure much more nervous about how we were getting along, and we also couldn't see rushes. I remember on that film, there was no way to see rushes, particularly with sound. We could eventually, after 2 weeks or something, see some black and white rushes projected in a movie theater, but without sound, and at least you saw how it looked. But so I was quite nervous on the first couple of films where you couldn't see rushes. First 3 films, in fact.
They want us to start wrapping up.
Oh, okay.
So I've got 2.5 things in 5.5 minutes. Why did you take on Surviving Picasso?
That was offered to us by Warner Brothers. And it's the strangest story, I think. I bought that, it's not a novel. It was a book by Françoise Gillot, Picasso's mistress, that she wrote right after she broke up with Picasso in the early 50s. And I bought the book then and never read it and put it on my bookshelf. And years passed. And then I was sort of cleaning out my bookshelf and rearranging my books, and I thought, oh, I've never read this, I think I'll read it. And I read it. And I thought, this would make a fantastic movie. But I put it back on the bookshelf. Completely out of the blue, we were getting in, what were we doing? We were doing the editing on Jefferson Paris. Completely, no, sorry, it was way back in the days of Howard's End. We got a call from Warner Brothers saying that they had this book about Picasso, written by Françoise Gillot, and about their life together. Would I be interested in making it into a movie? And I said, sure.
Serendipity, anything.
Yeah, and I always admired Picasso. I mean, for a long time, I painted a lot, and I went to art school, and I always admired him, and I was just interested. I mean, the book was so good. It's a very, very good book. Of course, we ended up not being able to use her book because her children didn't want her to sell the rights, but we were still able to piece together the life. But that isn't really answering your question, except to say that it's one of those things, well, why not? I mean, had I not just read the book and liked it, I might have said, I'll have to think about it, but I didn't. I mean, immediately I said, I want to do it.
And Hopkins was up for it straight off, was he?
Yeah, pretty much. It was a film where he felt he had he never, at the beginning, was quite happy with his accent, and he wasn't sure. After all, he was a Welshman, speaking in English, who was supposed to be playing a Catalan who would be speaking in bad French. And what sort of an accent would as an actor would you have? And finally he got something that he liked, but he was a little edgy for the first couple of weeks about the accent.
What's he like when he's edgy? What's he like when he's edgy?
You know it. So he may say something. Sometimes I've noticed there are times when he says, "Why are you putting the camera there? Don't put the camera there. God damn it, move it there. I can't do this. I want to look at the camera." So we move the camera.
You do move the camera?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, it's ridiculous not to. I mean, who wants to upset him? So.
I've interviewed him twice, and I didn't want to upset him on either occasion. Last question. In 50 years, what have you learned?
Oh, well, you have to look at my films and find out. Start with the first one. Then you'll learn. I think you'll see I've learned something.
Well, all right. Well,
No, it was it's been a great experience, and I wouldn't have thought really that I was cut out to have a life which was so public in the working part of it, because making a film is a very, very public thing, and you're surrounded with many, many, many different people, and you have to constantly interact with them in all sorts of ways, hour after hour after hour, month after month, and so on. And I wouldn't have thought that by temperament I'd be the kind of person who would actually want to do that. And the opposite has been true, that in fact I was probably meant to do that, and that was that I mean, I'm happy in that environment with a lot of people and a lot of noise, and constantly having to make up my mind about something, and being a diplomat this moment and a tyrant the next, and all this kind of thing. And as I say, you always have to get your own way. That's, I suppose, if you want to make something in the arts, you have to have your own way. And I suppose that's what's come out of 50 years of making movies. I hope something more, but...
James Ivory, thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
Very much indeed, sir.
Okay. That was fun.
Good.
Good. Now may I have a glass of water?
Now you may have a glass of water.